This explainer. Today, we're going to descend layer by layer into a cultural phenomenon that has absolutely redefined modern horror. We're tracking the wild, astonishing evolution of the backrooms, a concept that started out as a super niche, single internet post and somehow mutated into a record-breaking Hollywood blockbuster. But even more importantly, we're going to unpack what our obsession with this terrifying, endless office space actually says about our modern anxieties. Let's get into it. All right, picture this. It's 2019, and a completely anonymous 4chan post drops. This is literally the exact moment a whole cinematic universe was accidentally born. The prompt was simple, right? It just asked users to share images of spaces that felt wrong or deeply unsettling. Well, one user uploaded this eerie, brightly lit photo of an empty, yellowed office space, and they paired it with a chilling warning. They said if you slip out of reality in the wrong area, you end up trapped in the backrooms. It was the perfect little snippet of a creepypasta, those spooky stories people copy and paste across forums. But this specific one, it struck a massive collective nerve.
So, level 0, no clipping out of reality. To really grasp this phenomenon, we've got to start at the surface level of the lore and define exactly how somebody enters this dimension in the first place. The absolutely crucial concept here is no clip. If you play video games, you probably know this. No clipping happens when a game's digital collision detection fails and your character just falls right through a solid floor or a wall, tumbling into the empty void outside the map. The Backrooms lore takes that exact video game logic and applies it to real life. It introduces this incredibly unsettling idea that our physical reality is just this imperfectly programmed construct. It's flimsy, and if you aren't paying attention, you can literally slip right through the cracks of the real world.
And if you do no clip, well, the internet mythology says you're instantly trapped in level 0. Now, this isn't some fiery underworld with demons. No, it is a hyper-mundane architectural hell. Imagine being stuck in about 600 million square miles of randomly segmented, completely empty rooms. It's defined by the stink of old, moist carpet, which, let's be honest, is horrifying enough on its own, blinding mono-yellow walls, and that endless, maddening hum of fluorescent lights buzzing at maximum volume. It perfectly captures a very modern, sterile kind of dread.
Moving down to level 1, expanding the endless maze.
Because, of course, the internet didn't just stop at one empty yellow room. To expand this maze, people rallied around a very specific visual aesthetic called liminality. Liminal spaces are basically transitional in-between areas. Think about places you just pass through but you never actually stay in: an abandoned shopping mall, a vintage airport terminal at 3 a.m., or deserted school hallways. They're these human-made spaces that are suddenly entirely devoid of humanity. This aesthetic kind of crept out of academia and blew up in mainstream digital folklore, prompting thousands of people online to start crowdsourcing a whole universe of empty, transitional dread to expand the backrooms. And through literally thousands of dedicated wiki pages, fans turned this solitary concept into a terrifying, active ecosystem. They didn't want these liminal spaces to be completely empty, so they populated them with bizarre, numbered monsters known as entities. We're talking about things like the lurking smilers, deceptive skin stealers, giant death moths, sinister partygoers, and the feral hound. It's wild. It brilliantly shows how collective internet storytelling can create this endless, constantly evolving horror. It proved that millions of strangers collaborating online could build a mythology just as rich as any major studio franchise.
Which brings us to level 2, a viral digital nightmare. Fast forward to 2022, a 17-year-old filmmaker named Kane Parsons managed to no-clip all of this sprawling internet lore into a massive found footage web series on YouTube. What made it so good is that he grounded the wild internet myth by inventing a really compelling 1990s corporate origin story, the Async Research Institute. According to his timeline, by 1989, Async's magnetic distortion tests, which were originally supposed to solve housing and storage crises, accidentally tore open a threshold right into the backrooms. And this, in the lore, directly caused a massive spike in missing persons cases throughout the 1990s. He basically gave the madness a strict corporate continuity. And man, audiences absolutely devoured it. Parsons used 3D modeling software like Blender and Adobe After Effects to render these impossible spaces, and he earned over 190 million views on his channel. Just a staggering number. He completely nailed that hazy flash photography aesthetic of the 90s, complete with the gross yellow lighting and the off-kilter white balance. It really firmly established the Backrooms as more than just a creepy picture. It became a digital viral sensation with huge narrative potential. Now for level 3,
Hollywood enters the backrooms.
You better believe Hollywood was watching those YouTube view counts. Major studios saw the built-in audience, and the acclaimed production company A24 quickly snatched up the property for a 2026 theatrical release. And even with a pretty modest $10 million budget, their production design was just staggering. They snagged amazing leads like Chiwetel Ejiofor and Renate Reinsve, and they didn't just rely on digital effects. They built over 30,000 square feet of massive, physically disorienting sets across 4 sound stages, using 37,000 square feet of wallpaper. They created a literal architectural sandbox of intersecting arches and misaligned floors to physically trap the actors in this unreality.
The result was historic, to say the least. The film grossed an incredible $277.4 million globally, becoming A24's highest-grossing film to date. But honestly, the craziest part? Kane Parsons, who was handed the directorial reins based entirely on his YouTube channel, became the youngest director ever to hit #1 at the US box office at just 20 years old. The Backrooms had officially conquered Hollywood.
Finally, we reach level 4, the rise of institutional Gothic.
So we have to ask, why did a teenager's 3D render of an ugly office building resonate so deeply that it made hundreds of millions of dollars? Well, a really fascinating analysis from the MIT Press highlights this cultural shift we're going through. They call it the birth of institutional Gothic. Think about traditional Gothic horror, like Frankenstein or Dracula. That gave us crumbling castles, bloodthirsty aristocrats, and the ghosts of past generations. But today, our modern monsters aren't vampires hiding in manors. They are soulless, efficiency-seeking corporations. The terrifying dungeons are now winding, empty offices bathed in noisy overhead fluorescent lighting.
This institutional Gothic replaces those old supernatural phantoms with machine-made mundanity. It taps into this very worldly dread of workplace alienation that so many of us feel today. It reflects the empty, post-pandemic fiefdoms of our modern abandoned offices. Ultimately, the true horror in the backrooms isn't a ghost. It's the sheer indifference to human harm shown by these massive 20th century oligopolies that built these infinitely reusable spaces in the first place.
This quote from the MIT Press analysis really hits the nail on the head. The Backrooms is a direct reflection of our cultural unease, especially for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, who basically grew up entirely online. It's an acknowledgement that the middle class feels alienated and abandoned by corporate America. In this new mythology, the office isn't a place of prosperity or climbing the ladder. It's an inescapable trap. You're just wandering endlessly through the fluorescent prisons built by the corporate choices of past generations.
So, what should you take away from this explainer? Mostly that the Backrooms is so much more than a cheap internet jump scare. As we transition away from the physical office cubicles of the 1990s and move into this highly digital future dominated by billion-dollar data centers for AI and cloud computing, we're living through a massive threshold moment. The Backrooms forces us to look back and negotiate with the corporate sins and the environmental footprint of our 20th century past before we, quite literally, no-clip into tomorrow. I really want to leave you with this thought. As you log off today, just look around your own workspace. If humanity is excavating our society 100 years from now, how are future generations going to view the fluorescent labyrinths we built? Will they see places of innovation, or will they just see the eerie, inescapable traps of the Backrooms? Thanks for hanging out with me on this deep dive. And hey, remember to always watch your step. You never know where the floor